I appreciate you all taking time to come and participate in this. My name is Clayton Bodell. I am the Technical Director at the Pipeline Safety Trust. And we've got a lovely panel here consisting of some industry, academic, public, and former investigators, a really healthy panel. So appreciate all of them coming. Our format's going to be a handful of minutes for each panelist to present. And then I'll moderate some questions, and then we'll have a final Q&A at the end. There is a printout, an information sheet regarding liquefied natural gas that we prepared for you all. They're centered on the back table. You can either pass them around or grab one afterward. And yeah, let's get going. Just recognizing we're running a little bit late. We've got just left to right here, as you see it, Heather Sturgeon, who's a gas plant director at Xcel Energy. Scott Eustace, our community science director community science director at Healthy Gulf. Gary Kenny, Dr. Gary Kenny, he's a managing principal at Ciner Valley, and Dr. Jerry Havens, who is an emeritus distinguished professor of chemical engineering at the University of Arkansas. So appreciate them all coming. I wanted to share a little bit of high-level information for those of you that aren't familiar with liquefied natural gas, kind of as what it is, and really about how the facilities, to put into context some of what you'll hear. So there's generally four primary functions for LNG facilities, and those are liquefaction, which is the process of taking natural gas, which is normally a gas, and cooling it such that it becomes more dense, so it can be either stored or transported to a different location. There's the reverse process, which is vaporization, which is taking this cooled liquid, LNG, and vaporizing it. So basically warming it up and allowing it to be used in a distribution system or for some other equipment or process. Associated with some of these facilities, there might be storage. These tanks can be small, they can be mobile, they can be really, really big, to the tune of billions of cubic feet of gas in a particular tank. They can also be located on trucks, rail cars, ships, in order to move around, and that leads into the last chunk here for transportation. Generally, LNG is used because it condenses that energy into a smaller footprint than what the gas requires, and so you can move it around more easily. Now, in the United States, there are a lot of LNG facilities, and they are grouped by type. This is reported by the operators of those facilities to PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And the types are peak shaving, base load, mobile and temporary, satellite, and then there's another category. There's history to all of these, but peak shaving generally is storing or creating LNG to use at a time when it's needed most, perhaps when there's high energy demand during the winter season for heating homes, or maybe even for electrical generation through a natural gas power plant. Base load are facilities that are running all the time. There's a nice steady hum to those. There's mobile and temporary that are used to store LNG, maybe to deliver to a small distribution system that's having an outage for some reason, and keeping energy going to those homes. The one other point that I would make on this slide, there's a little overlap here, calling out import and export facilities. There's 14 of those reported in the last year, and those are almost always baseload. They're always running, and those are used to either bring in LNG to the country or to move it out of the country. Here's a map of the facilities produced by PHMSA, the regulator for these facilities, showing where they're located. That QR code will allow you to download that, and that is directly from PHMSA. And these slides will be available afterward. One thing I wanted to convey is PHMSA had a really big initiative to update these regulations that kind of started in the mid-2010s. The dashed line you see there is kind of about when PHMSA last pushed really hard on these. And you can see the facilities there on the far right. Those are the facilities that were built without these without updated regulations after PHMSA was told by Congress to update those regulations. And then a better picture here on the left is what the relative pie of these facilities looked like at that time. And so you can see that big 61% chunk. Those were the old historical peak shaving plants that the regs were kind of designed, the regulations were designed for. And you can see that that's no longer the majority anymore. It's a smaller piece. And then that little 4% slice at the top on the left side that, corresponded to what had been built, from 2010 to 2014, that ended up turning into a 22 now into a 22% part of the pie. It's a big chunk, and then you can see the 2010 to 2020, the current decade is also a relatively large chunk on the right. All to say, a lot of facilities have been built in the last 10 years. And then finally, for me, before I hand it over to Heather, there's kind of this little timeline of legislation and rulemaking. I won't dwell too much on it, besides to say the regulations are older. They have been updated along the way in the 2010 timeframe. There have been numerous petitions, and Dr. Jerry Havens will talk a little bit about some of the petitions, and those are ways that people can ask for the regulations, ask PHMSA to update the regulations that have sort of gone unheard. And I think that's good for me. Heather, there's the clicker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Sturgeon. I'm the Xcel Energy Director of Gas Plants. So like was mentioned earlier, I have 2 LNG facilities that were built prior to NFPA 59A code. So the first one being located in our Inver Grove Heights, Minnesota location. It's called our Westcott Gas Plant. It is a Chicago bridge and iron tank. We had 2 tanks on site. Tank 1 was the first built one at 1972. It is currently out of service in 2022 and plans to demolish it in 2026. Tank 2 is our largest tank that we own and operate, and that was built in 1976. For reference, it is 24 million gallons of LNG storage, otherwise known as 2 BCF. In other terms, it could be, if it were water, it'd be 36 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Our vaporization capacity out of Westcott is 156,000 decatherms per day, or 6,500 decatherms per hour. And our liquefaction rate is at 65 to 85 gallons per minute. We have a mixed refrigerant loop at the Westcott site, so that uses constituents such as butane, propane, ethylene, nitrogen, and methane to refrigerate the gas. Westcott does account for 19% of our design day supply in Northern States Power, Minnesota. Black Avenue is our site located in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It is also a Chicago bridge and iron design. We have 1 tank on site. It was built in 1968. And it stores 3.3 million gallons of LNG, or in other terms, 5 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Vaporization, we have 24,000 decatherms per day, or 1,000 decatherms per hour, and our liquefaction rate is much smaller than Westcott at 15 gallons per minute. Black Avenue accounts for 11% design day supply in Northern States Power, Wisconsin. To compare the processes for liquefaction, Westcott is much larger in terms of Black Avenue for liquefaction rate. However, our liquefaction rate is still much smaller than a baseload LNG type facility. So in terms of advanced rulemaking, I won't get into it, but I would like to say that we are a small scale facility in terms of liquefaction rate, even though we have a 2 BCF tank. We use processes called debottlenecking. So you'll hear that term quite often in the LNG industry. So it's how do you improve your production rate with the system. So there's tools we can talk about later. Vaporization, I have a comparison of my 4 sites. So we also operate 2 propane air blending facilities as well. So Westcott has a larger vaporization rate compared to Maplewood and Sibley, which are the propane air blending facilities. And those facilities are greater than Black Avenue. So Black Avenue is a pretty small vaporization rate compared to the other 3 sites. And all 4 sites discharge into a local distribution center. So you'll hear terms such as LDCs. That's a popular acronym in our industry. So where I come in, I was asked to come in from nuclear power plants. So I have a background in mechanical engineering, but I've improved nuclear safety systems at nuclear plants through most of my career. So in 2022, I was asked to come to the site to help restore design basis and safety margin and safety culture at these facilities. So similar to William Mojica's presentation this morning, we talk a lot about safety culture at our sites. So some history, back in the 1970s, 1990s, we had good record keeping and equipment reliability for the original equipment. However, in 1993, we had a vaporization upgrade at our Westcott facility, still had decent documentation. But then in the 2000s, the site management at that time upgraded the LNG pumps, the liquefaction equipment, and did not perform things that we do in normal modern day design, such as HAZOP reviews, which is hazardous facility reviews, little documentation, and no design basis. So what this did for us is in the 2010s, this led to some operational issues and put a production over safety culture mindset at these 4 sites. So bring it to present day, we have implemented the management of change process, which is a portion of the PSMS system that William discussed this morning. We also reverse engineered our liquefaction process by adding new instrumentation and used HYSIS modeling to help understand how the liquefaction process should work and work with safety margin for the operators. We've also formally written down the design basis in our operating and maintenance manuals. That was missing as well. And then we've improved our record keeping to bring it to modern record retention standards, so that way this never happens again. So modernizing the operator's experience. So just a quick timeline, some things to highlight. In 2021, we did the hazardous facility review for all 4 sites in 2021, which led to multiple gaps being identified and us to bring solutions to those gaps. In 2022, we optimized our liquefaction process to let us operate in the summer conditions by adding 2 new heat exchangers, but that led to the vulnerabilities in how liquefaction was operating. So we were able to identify the operator pain points and safety concerns with that process and have been implementing corrective actions to those. Stop work criteria is another item. So with the safety culture, giving the operators the full command and control if things do not look safe, that they have the ability to shut down the plant without management approval. And then in 2023, we recommissioned procedures and training. So that allows us to operate both the vaporization and liquefaction processes safely without exceeding any design limits. And then we also upgraded the graphics and alarms. So alarm hierarchy is an item, so what takes you out and trips you. And then in 2023, we recommissioned those procedures and did training. We actually use a simulator now for vaporization and liquefaction, so operators can practice starting up and shutting down the plants. And then most recently, we've implemented formal abnormal operating condition hard cards. So by the Part 193 requirement, you're required to discuss certain AOCs. We take it one step further and give more instructions for the operators when they're in these abnormal conditions. And lastly, we've upgraded our control room at the Westcott gas plant to a more modern design. So they get to have all their monitors at each desk and monitor the plant more closely. And I forgot to mention, we also upgraded the fire and gas and life safety system at our sites, which allows for early detection of gas leaks and fires on site to protect people and property. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Heather. Yes, Scott, since your presentation's here. Yeah.
Thanks. Really quick, Scott Eustace, Community Science Director. My grandfather built pipelines for Pittsburgh, Gulf, King Mellon, and that's why I'm an environmentalist. What we have when we look at gas transmission incidents, DOT has 2 special colors, the Louisiana Gulf and Louisiana. We're a very special place here. I've got some tour notes if you want to drive down the road to Blackman's LNG during your time in New Orleans. We always sit here and there's so many exciting leaks to go look at. This was Venture Global Calcasieu Pass. During construction, the wind from Laura, during construction, it messed up the site pretty good. So, we're worried that the LNG export build out, sorry, I'm not so familiar with a lot of things. I'm familiar with the export build out that's recent and is coastal. We're losing a lot of land. Not going to bore you with that, but it is like, will Louisiana be habitable we're struggling with estimated annualized damage to our homes, and we're confused why companies don't have to produce estimated annualized damage, or like us 10-year, what's a 10-year maintenance schedule on a plant that's going to be, you built it on land, it's going to be in open water in 15 years. The very places we're losing lots of the land mass, maybe we're losing the fastest on Earth, that's where the pipelines go, and it's the same thing: oil, LNG, CO2, Calcasieu, Sabine watershed, and Barataria. So, many of these things apply. I would just say high pressure pipelines. We have 4 pipeline hearings this month. 3 of them are next week. and some of them, in Miss Cindy's area, we got 2 of them are at the same time, one 48-inch oil and one very large gas. So, it's like these decisions, we keep making the same bad decisions, and we just wonder why when we know the sea level is rising. We have a public map of the pipelines in Louisiana that's hard to get. And it's, in Louisiana, I would say it's useful to reframe, maybe hard to believe. It's useful to frame in plantation sales, right? Why is Plaquemines LNG in the lowest spot in Plaquemines Parish? Well, the lieutenant governor pitched it, and he did make money off the land sales, and he sold it to an Arlington LLC that is a shell company of Ventricle, right? This is just in the assessor's records, right? Who's managing Louisiana? Our former AG is Prime Resource LLC, right? He was investigated by the FBI for abusing the H-2B system, right? A very anti-immigrant guy, also profiting off of H-2B to build Sempra Camry, right? And it's worrying when it's like, okay, we're supposed to trust that this thing is built correctly. I'm not sure when the watchman is on the payroll. So you notice in Louisiana, this is, again, LNG export, limited to export, build out. We've got 8 in Calcasieu, Sabine, 3 in Plaquemines. Miss Melanie's in Freeport on that map, 3 down in the valley. But, for Louisiana, we've got a large ship risk fire profile. It takes longer for the ships to get to the Gulf out of Louisiana because of our very unique estuarine ecosystem. And it means that Plaquemines LNG can be hard to evacuate. Of course, we fish, and here's Port Aransas. Don't be on the jetty. But of course, we're going to fish on the jetty. And there hasn't been a lot of discussion about, okay, this person is danger close. He's in zone 1. Nothing's going to happen, right? But if we just were talking about, okay, maybe there's a sign. So if someone's driving down from Freeport and going fishing in Port A, they got it 2 minutes. Okay, so I've got blast zones. We're going to skip to the ship blast zone. Everybody south, downriver of Plaquemines LNG lives in zone 2, which is you need a concrete wall. You're going to need a concrete wall in about 2 seconds after that thing. If anything happens with the ship, just be aware of the ship. These are high consequence, low probability events, but we just need communication from the company to the public that it's not happening. Like the Coast Guard recommends, we need warning signals and education programs. We've got a 2-page glossy. It's not great. We also have to evacuate through this and through the tank envelope. And, it was permitted in 2019. It was permitted with a 100-point punch list on the safety. We're missing all of these safety plans, but we're going to approve the project. And, if you're cynical, it was 2019. So, FERC did say that, it was moving forward without looking at how the vapor cloud was affecting Highway 23, which is your evacuation zone. And so if you drive there now, I do encourage you to go there. It is a site. But know that we couldn't get the siting analysis for Plaquemines, but we expect it's the same as CP2. CP2 is 1,000 feet, which encompasses the highway. The planned delta encompasses the highway, but it also touched that river levee. And, the Army Corps really cares about messing with that river levee. That's the Pax Americana, right? That's a $2 billion dredge budget. So I think that is the reason why, that safety reason that the 1031 thermal exclusion envelope was touching the levee. I think that's why Venture Global has changed Delta to Plaquemines expansion. But the line from FERC and Venture Global is, these projects have nothing to do with one another, even though it's the same company on the same land. So, but we do think that, so if by that logic, Gulfstream LNG should not move forward because Magnolia Plantation is just too skinny. They could downsize the tank, but it's like, oh my God, this site is open to the tide. Let's not do this. I think, regulations, what's that? But I think, unfortunately, the United States is becoming more like Louisiana than Louisiana is becoming like the United States. And, so often when I'm talking to Exxon, we're talking about what is your maintenance cost in year 10? And it costs wetlands to maintain a pipeline. We can see that for the Exxon Bonefish line, the old 62 oil pipeline, 400 maintenance digs in 13 years. And they were, they sold it to Carlyle, right? They sold it to Carlyle Group, which, I would rather Exxon operate it than a hedge fund. So it's a worrisome thing when these things are being put out to pasture. We don't think Carlyle will decommission. I think it's geographically correlated with that highlighted dot, which is our death of a mariner from a HVL. The prop hit a floated HVL pipeline. So Gator Express was built in this block group. We're going to have maintenance problems. We're going to have maritime interactions. And there's a coastal data set. So we can't often see this from most pipeline projects, but we can see it when they're building it in our food production system, right? We can see when they have to dig, and Jefferson Parish has a lot of digs. So, it's bad to be putting your pipeline in Barataria and Calcasieu Sabine. We don't care about the environment or people, but at least for the continuity of your own project, will the project survive year 10? And when I asked Ms. Dolezal this, she just turns white. And then FERC will say, well, the project life is a 50-year project life, for a site that'll be underwater in 15 years. So, yes, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Scott. I hope everybody's recognizing there's a lot of passion and there's a lot to say on LNG.
So, good morning again. Okay, so Scott got you right down to some great specifics, so I'm going to bring you back up on a little bit more of a macro level here. And my clicker. Oh, no, I got it here.
You got it.
Oh, okay, here we go. How do we get that far? Go back. Oh, well, not so much. But, what the heck, we'll talk to the slides. Right. Yesterday and today, we've talked a lot about the regulations, the form of the regulations. We're going to be changing all these kinds of regulations. Or there is an executive order out there to revise the regulations, bring them, quote, up to date and everything of that particular nature. I'm going to focus a little bit away from that, because the form and the nature of the regulations is one part of the overall regulatory puzzle. There are other parts to that, and one of the very important parts, and Bill brought that up in his discussions this morning, or his presentation this morning, is that enforcement issue. And from my perspective, and again, for a number of you, I've spent about 25 years overseas, both underneath the aspect of trying to comply with regulations as well as being in the regulator enforcing regulations. And it's difficult when we start moving more and more into these performance-based, goal-oriented regulations. It puts the regulator in one heck of a position. Bill's slides this morning regarding this kind of decline that they've been seeing in the enforcement aspects of it, when I think of that, and I think of some of the issues that are going to come forward, depending upon how these new regulations are developed, raises concerns as to the capabilities and the capacities of the regulators themselves to actually enforce those regulations. And I'll give you a quick example. Many years ago, when in the United Kingdom, when we went over a lot of risk-based analysis and all of this kind of stuff, we brought all those in back in the 90s, 30-some years ago. We're just kind of seeing that today. And I was sitting in this discussion where I had been seconded into the UK HSE, and sitting on the other side is a bunch of industry representatives, and they give me this risk analysis. And they say, man, you know, this Piper Alpha event, we've done this for our offshore facilities, and we have calculated that it's like the probability of that occurring in our facilities is 10 to the minus 15 per year. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, 10 to the minus 15 per year. 10 to the minus, I mean, that really sounds impressive, doesn't it? And then it strikes me, and I look at it and I say, hey, do you know what the age of the universe is? And they look at me and say, what are you talking about? Well, what's the age of the universe? You know, I don't know. Well, it's like 10 to the minus 12 years. So you're basically saying the probability of this happening in one of your facilities is 1,000 times less than our universe being created. And thank goodness the vice president was a amateur astronomer, and he said, okay, I think maybe we kind of need to sit back. That's the kind of issues the regulators that have to be, and it's the kind of issues the regulators need to be in a position to be able to push back on. Does that exist? Well, and let me just quickly, you went through that. Oh, this is, by the way, the tension. If you look at, I only have 1 minute, so I'm going to quickly hit this one, because this is a part of the tension. The last 10 years, the blue line is the increase in regards to LNG export. And now you can see why that executive order is there. And you've been hearing all these things like billions of cubic feet and all that kind of stuff. So let's take this down to dollars. So in the last 10 years, those green lines represent the average daily revenues for LNG exports based on information from the Energy Administration. So you're looking at, now you can kind of see why there's this tension going on is, man, there is one heck of a lot of money that can be made out of this. And I'm getting the signal in that, so I got to be a good person here. And we talked a lot about the Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Agency. There are, by the way, 3 other regulatory bodies or agencies, administrations that have involved in this. The EPA, the Coast Guard, FERC itself, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but it's PHMSA itself. And just very quickly, PHMSA has had in place about 20 years some provisions in their regulations that are very performance-based. These within the pipeline area and that. And there is, as Bill showed in that, a web page that you can go to, PHMSA puts up, it's their pipeline enforcement. And we went through, when I was on the Academy committee, we went through about 20 years of enforcement activities around those performance-based activities. We could not find one enforcement activity in that 20 years directly related to those risk-based issues. Right. I see the big orange sign out there, so I have to sit down and turn over to Mr. Jeremy, or to Mr. Havens, Dr. Havens, and that. So sorry. Quick.
Okay. Is it okay if I speak from here?
Yeah, of course. Hey, it's all right.
I can advance them for you. Yeah, I'll flip them for you. I'll just take over. Let me take. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to make this informal and fast and ad lib. I was invited at the last minute, and I think you have 11 slides here that I hope people have looked at. I'm going to summarize maybe those 10 or 11, I hope in 3 minutes or 3 to 5 minutes. I've been working on this question for about 50 years now. I think in a week I'll be 86. I'm retired for about 8 years, but I have been working on the present problem for about 9 years, since the workshop in Washington in 2016. And I want to start with the fact that in my opinion, LNG is one of the safest industries and one of the best run industries that I know about, that I've worked on for a long, long time. The problems that I have started in about 2010, 2012 with export terminals. There were, in my opinion, no really serious problems that we did not treat pretty adequately prior to that time. Since that time, I'm afraid I have bad news for you. We have gone backwards, in my opinion, in the last 10 years. The problem is not science, in my opinion, it's political. Let me start. The first slide goes pretty fast. The second slide says our major problems is failure for the export terminals, and I want to emphasize, everything has started with those, not before. The problem now that is untreated is vapor cloud explosion hazards. And it is new to the industry because prior to the exporting trade, there were no large quantities of heavier than air hydrocarbons used on the facilities. Now there are. Those are heavier than air, and when they are released accidentally, they will go to the ground, they will flow in every direction, they are basically uncontrollable, and if they are not attended to, they will form a pancake cloud over the whole site, and it will, if it reaches an ignition point, the plant will be lost. We have now about 15 of those that have occurred in the last 20 years, and that's the problem I'm talking about. There have been at least 10 export terminals approved and are now operating. There is a new model that is the model that is used to determine the consequences for those terminals. It is called FLACS, F-L-A-C-S. I was the author with my students of one of the first models called DEGADIS in the early days, the 80s, when the regulations were written. FLACS is a much more highly advanced model, will do a lot of things our old model would not do. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it is being used erroneously today. FLACS is used with another model. By the way, FLACS is a proprietary model. To my knowledge, that's the first proprietary model we've ever had. That essentially means it's not transparent to the user or to the consultants who may work for the users. FLACS is necessarily used because it is so complicated in its presentation of the cloud concentrations that it has to be simplified. It is simplified with another model called Q9. Neither is available to the public. In my opinion, most of the accidents have occurred in zero winds. If you look into the history of the workshop, that was the message. Zero winds. In zero winds, the cloud does not go in the preferred direction. It goes in all directions. It can cover a plant if it's not discovered early. It can be ignited and you lose the whole plant. That has occurred too many times. Remember, I'm afraid that there's been a failure to consider experience in the experimental data and the experience that we have here. A total failure to really consider the experience. One of the slides has picture 4 of those fires that resulted. Now be sure you understand, you're not looking at an explosion. You're looking at a fire after the explosion that shows the plant being completely failed. The biggest one that has occurred that probably has received the most attention was in 2005. It was in Buncefield, England, gasoline terminal. The losses were complete, but no one was killed because it was light, it was at night, and it was unattended, automated. Now, there have been up to 50 people killed in some of the accidents. All of that was described in the public workshop. The announcement was that we would have to have new regulations. That was 9 years ago. We have none yet. They are still in the process. I think I've already covered this slide and this slide. Now, I was invited by PHMSA to write a proposal for how we might correct this situation. Basically, I wrote a proposal and said, look, any of these accidents must be investigated and the environmental impact statements should be evaluated to see if they are correct. And I suggested how they might do that. That was accepted by PHMSA. To my knowledge, it has been approved for funding. It is up for funding. I requested that it be done by the Sandia National Laboratory, and I know that it has been received by the Sandia National Laboratory, and I know that they have said they would fund it. I have asked for it to be funded, and that's where the situation stands today. That's the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you, panelists. Appreciate you and your perspectives and in the sharing of knowledge that you have. I was going to moderate some questions, but I do feel a little energy in the room and would like to instead open it up to questions that you might have in order to take advantage of, not what I want to ask, but what you want to ask. So we've got mic runners, and let's please start here in the purple. Thank you.
My question is for the first speaker. I guess I'm just really wondering what caused the lack of procedures and documentation. It seems like a bad business model to go from having all these things to not having all these things, especially when we're talking about safety.
That's a great question. So one of the contributors to that was individuals in leadership roles who didn't understand the asset they're managing. So a lot of the leaders who are put in that position manage linear assets like pipeline and regulator stations. So at an LNG facility, we have compressors, pumps, other moving parts, which requires different expertise. So I think that would be the biggest contributor to that decline, and then lack of maintenance procedures. Another item, we switched software programs as another contributor, and so the individuals who switched the maintenance software did not populate the maintenance plans into that. So for a period of time, maintenance wasn't being performed. So, yes.
Quick question for Professor Havens. You mentioned this model for the vapor cloud modeling, and we all know that all models are wrong. Some are just more wrong than others. And it's all about the assumptions. You mentioned that zero wind assumption. Is it that they assumed no wind, or did they assume wind for dispersion?
Okay, I can tell you that to the best of my knowledge, I've investigated all of the environmental impact statements. Zero of them have calculated the hazard with zero wind. None of them. I have said repeatedly that is not correct. You cannot do the job adequately by modeling with a slow wind, like a 0.5 meter per second, because it's a transition that just doesn't work that way. And so the answer to your question is, I think it is not even being treated at all in the regulations.
And as a follow-up, Dr. Havens, does the FLAX model allow that flexibility for no wind, or is it?
To my knowledge, it does not allow it to be run by zero wind, to my knowledge. But it is a proprietary model, and I can investigate.
And for some other evidence, my sites are currently updating their dispersion models to improve evacuation criteria. So I learned something new about the FLAX model. So
I'm very sorry, but I could understand that, but my ear is not.
No, you're
real
fine.
good.
At my sites, we're updating our dispersion models to modern day standards, and I appreciate you bringing up the zero wind. Because for the general public, when it comes out of the tank at minus 260 degrees, it does sink, and you need wind to help it get to atmosphere. So
I would like to say that in response to the statement that models are always wrong, they're always wrong until they have shown to be correct.
They're always wrong, but they are useful. I thought that was a full quote, but I can confirm that the one siting analysis we have access to, the CP2 that I'm drawing conclusions from, also uses wind. It's not a no wind scenario, and that document is linked in the slides.
But by the way, for the public, if you're really interested, Dr. Havens has talked about an unconfined vapor cloud explosion. You can go on Google, just put in UVCE or unconfined vapor cloud explosions. You'll probably find 20, 30 videos, and that will show you some of them in actual facilities. It will actually show you what an unconfined vapor cloud explosion can do.
May I also say that on the last slide, there is a website that is available, which I was set up for me with the assistance of PHMSA, and there are about 25 comments that I have put in there in the last 9 years.
Yeah, so that's a docket, a PHMSA docket with a lot, and almost all of it. I'm not aware of any response from PHMSA on the matter as to whether or not the petitions brought are valid or that PHMSA's taken action on them.
Good morning. So I'm not sure who this is for, but the question is, how does NFPA fit into your? Nobody seemed to bring up the fact that most of PHMSA's regulation refers to NFPA for implementation of safety protocols as well as all kinds of other stuff. And NFPA seems to be this regulatory agency that's in and of itself and very difficult to penetrate in terms of what they're actually doing and when they're going to do it. So if someone could just comment on how they factor into your decisions about safety as well as regulatory oversight.
Well, NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Association, and it's an industry, or well, I'm going to say an industry organization body. And God, I never needed to have a mic in the past.
I just want to make sure online picks it up.
We're on the world.
Oh, we're on. Oh, that's right. Thank you, Scott. I'm sorry. Let me just step back. NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Association. It's an industry body. It's made up of individuals from industry, some academy members, well, I shouldn't say, but academics, or academy versus academics. And it develops consensus standards, and it is just that. One of the things in a lot of our regulations, PHMSA regulations, and that are replete with them, are references from the regulation into those industry standards. And that's where NFPA comes in. The regulations themselves do not set specific limits for like the radiative flux that is to be at the fence line of a facility. That is put into NFPA. Now, the positive thing about that is when we look at the updates of our regulations, it probably, in fact, take NFPA 59A, the regulations currently refer to 2001. There's a 2023 version of NFPA out there. So those regulations, especially if they get into an ISO standard or something, must be updated every 4 years.
And as an industry person, so Part 193 requires the 2001 edition. As I mentioned before, my facilities were built before the fire code. So when we go to look at our gap analysis and say what needs to be improved for protecting our personnel and our neighbors, we're using the current edition of NFPA 59A 2023 to upgrade our system. So 2026 has more prescriptive measures in it for maintenance plans and things of that nature. So if the government decides to adopt it in whole, I think there will be benefits to the industry mandating those maintenance programs. So just to help put some color on that.
And just as a reminder, I studied fish in school, but you know, fish are hard. I was doing Bayesian inference modeling, so you know, fish is mostly math actually. But you know, of course, these things were happening in 2016, and I'm getting the phones ringing off the hook from engineers in DC. It's like, you've got to do the FBA, you've got to do quantitative risk analysis. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so we have, over the past 9 years, tried to develop a nonprofit consultant pool, but as you know, those people are poached. Those people are hard to contract with because the nonprofit sector cannot get their kids through college. So they're going to be conflicted out, but we have successfully run a few CFD models, and we hope to continue to. We hope that there are experts that know the proprietary software that we can continue to contract with. It's very political.
Dr. Havens, anything else to add on that question before we?
One point I want to make, I'm not arguing with the NFPA models. I've worked on them with NFPA committees. I don't disagree with them at all. As a matter of fact, if you look at the federal regulations, and were it not for the incorporation of a new NFPR, there would be no explosion requirement for export terminals. But for export terminals, there is, because of an amendment that came through and was incorporated in the federal regulations by NFPL.
So here's a question. Can I? Sorry.
Let's take one question and we'll come back. Or is it related, Gary? Sorry?
I'll wait.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Cindy Robertson, my question is what impact, you know, like Venture Global, they put these big walls saying that they're going to stop the ocean coming in. And what impact do those walls around the facilities to stop flooding have on, okay, that was obviously a good question.
Okay. My first start on the terminals was in Oregon with the terminal that is no longer being considered in Oregon. Now, at that location, there was a vapor fence that was reported to be 100 feet tall, concrete supported. Now, today, most of the plants in Louisiana and other places like Texas require a fence, a vapor fence around the plant on the boundary to prevent the regulation from being exceeded by dispersion. In other words, if you don't have the fence, they cannot meet the regulation for the dispersion. The fence stops the gas at a heavy gas at the boundary. So they pass even though they would not pass without the fence. Now, a tall fence, in my opinion, requires an investigation of the additional propensity for explosion of the cloud if it is partially confined. That is not considered in a regulation.
And in regards to Plaquemines LNG, which I know, it's, again, the real estate question, it was decided that it would be built in this sunken garden style. Like you remember the 70s, everybody gathered around for hors d'oeuvres in the well. So it's down there. It is the lowest spot in Plaquemines Parish. And so we were additionally concerned with that. We heard about, I thought they would build it like a offshore platform, put it up on concrete pilings. My house is on concrete pilings. So like, why is the LNG plant in a sunken garden? And to get the pipeline out, the pipeline was going through the marsh. The marsh is 8 feet above the terminal. So you also have a 90-degree bend right in the hammer and the anvil. So you got a wall, and we got a couple of levees, multiple lines of defense, right? But a Katrina would roll right over that. But both of those fences are going to create induced surge in the direction of the Gulf, right? And you got waves, you got churn. And that's right where we have two 42-inch 90 degrees. And so we've got a potential for vessel strike at that Gulf-facing side for Gator Express. Because again, look at the pictures from Katrina. We had pogie boats up on the Highway 23, right? So I mean, we've got a lot of fishing vessels that come in storms, and it's not good to have that 90-degree bend for a large pipeline at the place where you've got induced storm surge because of the wall.
Yeah, let's. I think we have got one or two more. I want to make sure I give Dr. Kenny a chance to offer the sentiment earlier. But yeah, please go ahead with this question.
Thank you. Are you sure? Sure. Okay. My name is Misha Mayer. I'm with the public. Dr. Jerry Havens, there is a rumor that is circulating within my community that I understand, where the plant workers at Venture Global CP1 LNG are saying that if that facility explodes, it'll take out the entire state of Louisiana. It is something that we've heard there, and we have also been under the impression that a 30-mile blast radius is actually a 300-mile blast radius for LNG export facilities, and I would love clarity on that sentiment so I can bring that back, because that is a horrifying concept. And I would love for your words on that.
Was that question directed to me?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I can tell you this example. I think this has to do with the problem of whether a wall causes a bad problem or not, and how bad might that problem be. If one is careful to look at the Oregon terminal, there was a letter of recommendation required for that terminal. Look at that letter of recommendation. It says it is a conditional approval. It is conditioned on the federal government proving that the 100-foot wall will not be damaged by an explosion that might occur inside. It was never tested because they withdrew the terminal. It is the only letter of recommendation from PHMSA that I know of that makes that one. And so the point is, the question is never going to be investigated that you're talking about. The fact is that the wall answers the problem of the dispersion and says that the cloud cannot go off there, and that's the end of that argument. If the explosion problem is not considered, then it means that an accident is being overlooked.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Dr. Kenny, and then I think maybe one more question.
Okay, first, I'm really struggling. Oh, I'm sorry, what's your question?
No, go ahead.
I'm really struggling in my mind, just as I gave you the example about the 10 to the minus 15 and never going to occur basically within the creation of the universe, really struggling with the concept of a single plant having sufficient enough material. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really struggling with a single plant having enough stored LNG to do a 300-mile blast radius.
But what if there's 5 of them piled on top of each other?
Well, now if we start to have a chain reaction, that's a very that is an issue almost no regulators tend to look at.
I just woke up to a question. May I answer it?
You'll get the final word here.
I remember that I heard you talk about a blast in an LNG plant. The facts are, I believe, that if the plant is primarily handling LNG, there is no big blast effect. The hazard is a fire hazard, either cloud or liquid spilled. It is not until you get to the heavy hydrocarbons like those at this plant that the explosion problem is a real hazard.
Okay, I'm just going to double check timers. I thought we were ending at 10:40. Am I incorrect in that?
Hi, Clayton. So they're going to go long in there because they started a little late, so we can have a couple more.
Okay. I want to just acknowledge there may or may not be panelists who have flights to catch. Feel free to not miss your flight. But yeah, let's take another question then. If those that can stay can stay. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Melanie Oldham, and I'm with the Director of Better Missouri Clean Air and Clean Water in Freeport, Texas. And in 2022, Freeport LNG had a 450-foot high vapor cloud explosion, even though they said there was only a tiny percent that could happen, which a fire followed. Texas Commission for Environmental Quality talked about they released propane, ethylene, benzene, VOCs, and our firefighters in the little town of Freeport didn't wear respirators. They were not prepared to handle this type of explosion fire. And also, I don't understand all the modeling, but I understand how it affected our small communities. There's so many things that went wrong. Their emergency response plan went wrong. They still haven't met with the public to tell us about their new emergency response plan. They didn't have enough certified LNG operators. They had pipelines that were overpressuring since the day they opened in 2019. That shows what happens when you have an LNG, and there's 7 that were operating as of 2024 that does not have a safety culture. And we met with Tristan Brown with PHMSA. We met with Brian Lethco with PHMSA in Houston, and they were, quite frankly, shocked. You know, this company makes billions of dollars, but the maintenance was so poor, the alarms didn't work. You know, there's so many things that went wrong. And the last thing is, the 19-inch pipe that exploded was within feet of one of the 3 LNG tanks. They were actually loading an LNG ship at the time. You know, the fire marshal said, you know, it could have taken out half the island. Freeport LNG is built on our small Quintana Island. And they don't want to talk about there was 100 people, beachgoers on that island. But anyway, you know, I hear what you say, there's a tiny percent, but we experienced when there was a vapor cloud explosion and fire.
Yeah, Dr. Havens?
I must say that I have an airplane to catch, but in answer to your question, I am familiar with the Freeport. There was no explosion. There was a damaging overpressure. It was a levee, a big fireball, and it primarily involved a spillage of LNG. I believe that's true. Now, the point is, they did not have the kind of accident I'm worried about, is what I'm saying. It wasn't serious, but it was not the kind of accident I was talking about.
They said they weren't seriously injured, but again, until you experience, you can say it's mild, but Yeah, they did release hydrocarbons and methane and a lot of harmful things that injured our local firefighters.
Yeah, I think the point that Dr. Havens is making is that, however, big and significant that failure is and was, and there are plenty of learnings that need to be made by Freeport and other LNG operators. What Dr. Havens and others have expressed is that there is a far more serious threat associated with these types of facilities. Heather, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just something else to add. It sounds like from listening to your experience, the Swiss cheese model, I think, was referenced yesterday. So multiple barriers to prevent events sounds like were missed. So that kind of goes back to my own personal experience with our sites. There were multiple barriers that were degraded, and so that's where I'm charged with restoring those barriers. So I hope the management team at that site is seriously looking at those barriers and trying to fix it. And then for the fire department, there's a requirement annually to meet with the local fire departments. So if the utility isn't doing that and providing them the training they need, that's something else I would bring to the table. Yep.
Jim's not gave him a $1.5 million fine. Just unusual for him, so it was really serious for them.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully they're taking some of their profits and reinvesting in the site. So.
All right, one last question there in the back.
My question was simply, it appears that I think Dr. Havens was talking about the refrigerants, not the actual LNG when he was talking about the vapor clouds with the heavies in it versus the methane. And if those gases released, formed a vapor cloud, encompassed your facility, and then found an ignition source because of the propensity of the much higher, whole lot more carbon involved in those compounds than methane, that's where the big bang might just happen. And you'd lose your facility.
To help with that, for general public, LNG is not just methane. So the pipelines feeding propane, ethanes, all those other constituents. And so just with LNG storage, those heavies do tend to sink towards the bottom. So typically the methane and the nitrogen or whatever is in the top of the tank. So when you have a vapor release on top, you're more than likely going to have more methane coming out. But that if it was a spill, similar to what was talked about earlier, you're going to have the heavies come out first. So there's a difference too on what kind of rupture or breach it is.
Okay.
I was going to ask a question of Sarah in the back. Why in the United States regulations is it so difficult? Yes, sir. Why in U.S. regulations is it so difficult not to write in that you will use the most, when there's a reference or regulation calls in an industry standard, that you'll use the most recent standard?
So, I think incorporation by reference of standards is certainly something that a lot of people support. It makes sense to go to private standards to look to the sort of evolving issues. But from a regulatory perspective, right, the agency needs to be thinking about those standards and whether they comply with its mandates, its sort of focus on safety, environmental protection. So there has to be an overlay there of agency analysis of those standards and whether they're met. And it can't be sort of an automatic system. And I think the moment where the agency has to look and say, is this where we want to go, right, is sometimes takes time, and sometimes agencies don't agree with a private standard setting organization about sort of what they've done to the standard, and so they stick with the older standard. So I think it's a bit of a conflict, really, sometimes, and sometimes it's just that it takes a long time to do regulation. But I think, in general, right, we should want to see those standards updated, but sometimes it's a conflict around policy.
Right. Thank you so much, Sarah. Panelists, thank you so very, very much. This has been a pleasure.